have 20 minutes to present your solution to judges. You will be given a warning with 5 and 2 minutes remaining. After 20 minutes, the presentation will stop immediately, and no information will be considered after 20 minutes has elapsed. Following your presentation, there will be a 10-minute question and answer. You will be given a warning when 2 minutes remain. The question and answer will be stopped after 10 minutes, and you may begin. Thank you.
Good morning, we're Team Yankee, and I'm Caitlin. And to my right, I have my teammates Sierra, Cameron, and Alex. And we're excited to share with you our global IIoT strategy for Nidec Motor Corporation and give you a more in-depth understanding of how we reached our recommendations. Before we get started, I wanted to let you guys know that we'll be using industrial internet, of things, I'm sorry, as IIoT for the duration of the presentation. Maybe. Oh, other way. All right. So right off the bat, we wanted to highlight the key challenges that needed immediate attention right off the bat. So needing to establish the customer relationships, maintaining them is a concern. They're worried about losing the customer relationships by implementing a strategy that's solely digital. So preserving these relationships, our new strategy will highlight ways to kind of implement a strategy that uses both internet interaction as well as face-to-face interactions. The other two challenges are the global data ownership as well as market positioning. Global data ownership is a ever-changing, the regulations are changing due to global standards and the understanding that there's not a global norm for these regulations based on country. This then goes into sensor data ownership and cloud storage and how the regulations vary because the lines are blurry and who owns this data. From there it goes into how this foresight model and how to position that within the market and where that product kind of falls in terms of their product portfolio. And our strategy shifts from a more route-based monitoring, which changes the consumer's idea of where we sit as a product because we'll now be in a more hybrid model of being able to solely track your usage online versus meeting with your customers and your clientele through a maintenance routinely. So our synergistic strategy shows how the sensor communicates its data to the cloud as well as what we can now consider the remote technicians who will communicate back and forth with the customer's remote portal. They will be able to interact with them online as well as schedule appointments and their maintenance through that portal, allowing them to have both the face-to-face interaction and digital depending on what they're most comfortable with. The customers will have access to the cloud for their own data, but not access to the data in its entirety on the cloud, as well as the remote technician will be able to access their clients' data, but have no access to other clients that are on the cloud. So like I said, the customer portal is where the end user accesses and analyzes their sensory data, and they have complete control over the data, but not ownership. So Nidec has the title, ownership, and control over the data that is in the cloud. They have access on the secure cloud, which is represented by the lock, so they have the access to all of their clients' data, but the customer control only allows them to see their data, but not necessarily get access to it all through ownership.
So as we analyzed the challenges that pertain to this case and also devised our alternatives, which we ended up obviously not taking, however we still thought that they were important to this case, we kept asking ourselves these three questions throughout the course of analyzing this case yesterday, so we thought they were important to include. How can we foster value for all parties that are affected by the successful launch of this foresight platform? We saw in the case how one of the most pressing issues was the risk of losing these service provider relationships because they are also direct customers of Nidec. So main goal of NEDAC, as the case states, is the limiting sort of competition with people who are their own customers. The second question is, how can we overcome the severe lack of well-defined global regulations pertaining to the cloud-based IoT data? We developed a ownership model in which Alex will discuss later on in the case. The third one is, how can we maintain our dominant market position while adapting to this fourth industrial revolution? And this took us to our alternatives. So for the customer relationship side, our first alternative that we discussed was a strictly digital platform. And we obviously came up with some positive and negatives, however, confirmed that it was unfit because it does not address this issue of maintaining these customer relationships with the service providers. And we also really heavily considered a hybrid model of the data storage using a cloud and the physical servers. And we probably considered this one the most heavily, however, decided not to use it because of the risk of a lack of security and privacy in such a important and this industry has such magnitude to it that a breach or a cyber attack would have significant effects. It wouldn't be on the level of identity theft, it could be on the level of an electro grid going down. So we chose to not use that alternative. In terms of ownership of data, we discussed the possibility of having the end users having the title ownership of their own data. However, we chose against that because it would propose risk of a breach of trust, and as I just stated, this is a very highly regulated industry and has a lot of risk propensity involved in it, so breach of trust would be significant. And we also discussed end users gaining limited access to their data, but then we asked ourselves, what is the point? This foresight investment is a massive one for the company, and if they're going to do it, they should either go all out or devise a different way. And in terms of market positioning, we actually discussed taking a follower approach to this digital transformation, even though NEDAC has been an industry leader for some time now. And we discussed the possibility of them sort of taking the back seat in the beginning and learning from some other companies in the industry who have been using IoT platforms. However, we, through some further research, I mean, that was unattractive to us in the beginning anyways, and then through some other research, we learned that this is not passionate or tenacious, this is not thinking in the now, and we learned about the principles of the company, which is important to us. So we come to our first big question: how do we stay connected with our customers? Through our use of the remote service providers that we have, we attempt to create a sort of synergistic model so that they're not only a reactive maintenance provider, however, they can sort of be that bridge in the gap between reactive and predictive maintenance, and that's very important because we want to try and foster value for every single party and not have it be separate. We want every party to rely on each other and be interdependent so that it can foster that major parallel growth between them all. So we use this graphic to just sort of help you visualize our thought process and the organizational structure of the relevant customers. And obviously at the top is the NEDAC Corporation. They have the full title ownership of all of the data. And then below them are the contracted remote technicians who have limited access to only their respective clients that they manage and monitor through the platform. And then at the bottom is the end users who have full control and possession of their own data, however do not have title ownership because they don't have access to the secure data on the cloud. Of course, they can only see their own and analyze their own and do as they please with their own, but we didn't want them to have the ability of breaching any trust and having any access to other clients' information. And then on the right, the NEDAC Corporation is the facilitator of the customer relationship management, and we used Foresight to mimic almost a CRM software for the middle ground, who's the contracted remote technicians. So if you think about it in a way how an internal or external sales rep would use a CRM software like Salesforce, for example, through that they can analyze the performance, the major low levels that their clients hit, and they can sort of help them through that. So obviously it's not the same nature, but it is the same concept in their ability to analyze their clients and their specific accounts' performance and specifically the health of their equipment, which is a major part of this case. So we wanted to offer that that exclusive assistance beyond just the platform. And then obviously the proposed a data access agreement, and it will be integrated as an element of the already existing service agreement between the end users and the service providers. And they will have limited access, like I stated, to the respective service clients. And the payment agreement will remain as it is in the service agreement. However, that part is up to the end users and the service providers as if this case never happened. However, our incentive is that they will adhere to the value-added pay structure, in which you'll see in the following slide. And in that pay structure, the NIDIC company will incentivize both parties through premiums, which I'll discuss. So the remote technicians add value to the end users through the Foresight platform. By utilizing it like a CRM software, they are their exclusive solution advisors through this platform. And NIDIC also pays these premiums to end users upon purchases for the strict attempt, or the strict approach, the strict purpose of incentivizing the end users to in turn create a value-added percentage benefit to the remote technicians. A major issue is that, or a major concern of the remote technicians in the service industry in general, was that they were going to lose revenue stream because they relied on these impending malfunctions, in the reactive model. However, we're trying to transition to a predictive model. So we actually wanted to try and transfer some of the core competencies of these remote technicians and their expertise, and utilize them as a strategic asset in our platform, and not just make it reactive and situational in that manner. And it will be quantified on a basis of a perceived value index. So I use the comparison of how a customer, just a normal consumer, will use a perceived value index to decide whether they're going to buy a product or not. On all these different accounts, they will have a level of value that they think that they will achieve from the product. And it's not the same nature, however, the same concept, because when these remote technicians are working with and analyzing the data with the end users, the end users will come up with a perceived value that they've received from the technicians. And some examples I put are cost savings, time reductions, cost reductions in the supply chain, increased operational efficiency. So maybe the remote technician used his or her expertise to find a major inconsistency that was occurring, and when they fixed it, perhaps that could save a massive amount of time, which obviously aligns with cost reductions as well. So end user optimization, which is the original goal of the Foresight platform, that's sort of the traditional foundational aspect of it. And I highlighted a lot of different things that we thought would be possible beyond just the simple tracking sort of GPS nature of the forecast platform. Although that is genius in itself, actually GE Digital, the company who coined the term IoT, wrote an article that I read, and they were talking about how most of the companies that are utilizing these platforms and these technologies are actually underutilizing them by a pretty massive margin. They actually used the metric of only 3.7% of utilization of the total utility that you can get from these platforms, and that's because they're focusing on just the GPS nature. But we think that there are so many more aspects of it, and it can be almost like a catalyst. Instead of just a product that you sell for a price and then it's over, it can be a catalyst that can really launch parallel growth for all parties involved. And these are just some of the things that I thought were important.
So next is global data ownership, and we took this out of the case because we found it to be very important. Owning data is power, and we decided that for understanding that global regulations are changing and growing and adapting and are very different, whether it's the US or the EU, it was important for us to understand and realize that NIDIC had to decide their position on these regulations in order to decide whether they were going to implement a more local or global-based regulation and apply these regulations to either having everybody follow their local companies' or their local countries' regulations, or allow them to adapt as they travel across borders. So we found this map that we found very interesting because it highlighted how different in strength the regulations are of data across the world, in terms of whether they're heavy or moderate or limited in terms of the level of regulation that is available in these countries. And if there had been more time, there was a feature that allowed us to, you could compare the countries to each other, and it would detail the regulations that were in each country and how they correlated to each other, and the ways that you could use that data to then decide which regulations were most effective or necessary to that product or like regulation for that data.
As we look into the big problem of trying to figure out who really owns all the data that is produced through the system, we take it as the title ownership of Nedic that owns all the data through the system foresight and the software that they're selling. From the controller end, we have to understand that as Nedic owns the entire data set, that we have to create a case application policy that will apply to both controller and ownership of each of the ways that someone goes to the cloud data and sees it. So if the OEMs are going into the data, we don't want them to view data that is sensitive to the information in the systems. We want them just to view the information that is, disrupting a part in the motor. Under the ownership side, we want to just through the ownership, we went through a decision context, and we broke it down into 3 different things. So under ownership, to provide the well-being of knowing that the company owns all the data, we look at security. So under security with Nedic, they have the flexibility and the power with the multi-million-dollar corporation to protect the asset. For example, if a data breach into the system through the cloud server, or like how we wanted to go to the cloud server instead of like a solid server in a certain area, they have the flexibility to control and stop that before the data is breached from our end users. So that information is not getting out to the public, so someone can hack into their systems and change either algorithms in the motor. Compliance through the ownership, we want to make sure that our end users are not using the data from Nedic in an unethical way. We want them to use it to how they see their company. An incentive through ownership, us giving them foresight gives them the ability to remotely access each of the things, whether it's temperature or control of the motor or anything that is impacting everyday activities within that. The laws and acts that guided our decision through contacts, we first, I looked at the Cloud Act through research, and I noticed that when it was implemented in 2018, it brought information from an act in 1986 that was just a broad aspect of data and how it is shared either financially or through healthcare that needs to be protected. But as technology is advancing in today's world, it updates the information through cloud data or servers that they need to protect information that is out in the world today.
So next, this goes where we fall in the market category and our positioning.
So real quickly, our market and product positioning in the market, we want to get ahead of the curve. So we put evolve versus adapt. So instead of just adapting to this digital transformation, you can actually utilize the dominant marketplace that the company already has to kind of set the evolution for other companies in the industry to follow. We aim to escape the possibility of hyper competition becoming a reality and staying ahead of that curve, like I said. On the product side, I mentioned before how GE Digital discussed how many companies using these technologies are underutilizing the tendencies. We would like to avoid that. And also our incentive initiative launches the parallel growth, hence all of those optimization techniques that I came up with.
So for our competitive landscape, it's constantly changing as IoT is adapting throughout different parts of the globe. And the timeline of electronic trends are actually decreasing in time and getting quicker to catch on. And there's actually a study shown that 26% of people believe that IoT will enhance our ability of life, and that 25% of people believe that it will give a better insight into business. So here's a couple of things from our SWOT. Obviously, it's the world's largest manufacturer, so there's consumer recognition, which is a great thing. Our current risk-based monitoring costs a lot of money and time. Our Generation X is a great opportunity right now. They love things such as like Alexa and smartwatches, so they're actually the ones bringing it to the manufacturing. And then our biggest competitor right now is ABB Ability. They pretty much are on the same line, except their battery is lasting a little longer right now, and their data is collected a little different. They get their data from their servers monthly. And then this is their growth right now, and so you can see that we need to adapt much more quickly because they are coming up very quickly for this markets.
So we come to our final recommendations are to establish our proposal for integrating the remote technicians into the Foresight platform and also follow our guidelines for the product positioning through the maximum utilization of this platform. And on the data side, the company is to adhere to our data ownership model that we proposed with considerations for the upcoming provisions of the GDPR of the European Union in May of 2018 of this year. We think that could either propose a very disruptive provision, or it could be a pretty exciting opportunity for finally establishing some more firm global regulations for the industry to follow. And that's all. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Judges, we can have a question and answer.
You thought about how you're going to price this product?
We have thought about it, and we tried to look at some standards in the IoT industry in particular, because we had trouble finding things for the IIoT because it's not being used very heavily yet. And in the IoT industry, I found personally that there were some much smaller scale ones that were pretty reasonable. I think I saw one that was around 30, I believe. However, there was also, pretty unbelievable maintenance fees with that one. However, no, we did not come up with a pricing structure for our product.
You talked about incentives. Can you just expand on that a bit? And so when you guys considered incentives, were they all economic incentives? Did you think of any non-economic? And I think your grid may have highlighted a few of those that may feel non-economic.
So most of our incentives were economic, yes. However, a key one that we wanted to really touch on it in multiple of the slides, and we wanted to use our presentation to connect our strategy all back to it. Even though the two challenges that the case proposed were product and market positioning, and then the global guidelines for data regulation and ownership and transmission and all that. Through reading through the case multiple times, we found that a major issue, still perhaps the most major issue, was losing those customers of the OEMs and the MROs that the company had, and we wanted to really heavily address that. So we did use an economic nature for that incentive. However, the incentive itself was to keep them in the ballgame, and actually not keep them in the ballgame, but actually integrate them much more with our company, because before they were just our direct customers, and then they were the service providers of the end users, and it was kind of that very traditional, straightforward stream. However, with our proposition, we use the word synergistic because the premiums that NEDIC would be paying in terms of purchasing would be used for the value-added benefits of the service providers in the end. So then they would be relying on them just as the end users would be relying on us. And we tried to sort of create that cycle so that we could maybe foster growth together instead of just keeping this exponential pattern. Although it's obviously worked for the company pretty well, we wanted to try and propose a new strategy for this digital transformation. The thought process that we had was all of the revolutions that have happened. The Industrial Revolution took a number of years to become really prevalent, but all of the subsequent revolutions, like the technology revolution, the social media revolution, the mobile phone revolution, the Wi-Fi and interconnectivity revolutions, they all got incrementally smaller in terms of how long it took for them to pretty much be dominant in the world. And we used that concept for predicting how long it would take for this fourth revolution, Industry 4.0, I think is what the case called it. We used that concept to predict that it would take even less time than those other ones for this to become dominant. And that's why we wanted to try and foster this, three-way partnership, sort of. So I guess that would be our non-economic nature.
Question relates to the same thing. So you said NEDEC would obviously work through the service partners, but then we would also incentivize the end user. So do you foresee that relationship becoming very complicated for NEDEC to manage both our service providers and their end customers? Because couldn't there be a matrix type effect that saving customers being supported by two service providers?
Yeah,
Think
well,
about how the NEDEC manage the relationships there.
The way that we thought about it was having these service providers be actual users, have accounts, if you will, with the platform of Foresight, so that the company NEDEC, being the title owner of all of the data, could monitor everything that they were doing. And we assumed that with the magnitude of the company of NEDEC, that it would be doable, at least, to have either employees or systems in place to monitor the service providers that are, again, affecting the end users, to try and avoid that, what you just brought up. And we also, through reading over this case multiple times and then doing industry on the IoT and IIoT platforms and how they're really making their way into industries, we predicted and assumed that this is a pretty significant investment that NEDEC is making. It's it has the potential to change their business models and have a really long-term growth. So we did assume that even though that would be cost intensive, that it would be something that would at least be up for interpretation.
If you connect one of the premises of the study, which is the management of privacy of data and that mechanism, and your competitive assessment, did you guys think about what the need would be to be either in sync with the competitor in that space, or to understand how you can create a competitive advantage in that space? Or do you think like that is two independent decisions? Can the competitor have a different privacy standard than you would have, and both exist?
I think it would depend on the nature of the competitor, and if they are as global of a company as NEDEC is, if their main revenue streams and their main customer capacities are coming from domestic markets that aren't necessarily interconnected within the nature of their industries and their segments, then I think it could be two independent questions. However, no, I don't have a comprehensive answer for you.
It's not a fair question. I get it.
I'd say so.
Yeah, one more. You talked about ownership of all the data is with NEDEC. You talked about a difference between, or at least one way I understood, and I guess more a clarification of the question. What part does NEDEC own and what does the customer have access to? Because it was security and compliance, like top high-level stuff, is what NEDEC owns. But are you saying that the applications and all of that are owned by the end user?
No.
What you do with that data?
No. So when we said that, when we said that NEDEC has the title ownership of all of the data, they are the exclusive owner. They own the secure data in the cloud. They own the applications. They own the processes that Foresight uses. However, the control mechanisms of the customers gives them the power perception of ownership, so that they can gain their own insights and extract them and feel like they have that power. However, they only have access to their own data through the usage of Foresight. So they don't have the ability to modify an application on Foresight or do anything to affect the platform. They just have complete ability to access their own data and analyze it.
Do you establish the ownership relationship that you just described simply as a matter of law, the Cloud Act and U.S. versus Microsoft, things like that, or do you do it by contract?
Contract. The way we have it set up is that you would have a contractual agreement either in lieu of or in addition to whatever service agreement you already have with the service provider that highlights then that they would have access to all of their data, but that NEDIC would be the owner, so therefore they couldn't take take that data that they received or analyzed and use it at, say, a different company, or sell that data to a competitor or something like that. This is the way our strategy works, is preventing NEDIC from losing data and have it being sold to somebody else by their end user.
Our source for that was the legal framework of the GE Digital company that who coined the IoT term. Through that source, I thought it was a reliable source, and they said that the exclusive owner of the data has the ability and obligation, or not obligation, they have the right and the privilege to offer and propose data access agreements of different levels of limitability. So through that, we felt that it would be.
So really, construction individual contracts is what you're saying.